Members, thanks very much for attending this meeting of the Ad Hoc Subcommittee Welfare Reform. I'll go first of all to the Sederunt and Apologies, please.
Afternoon, Chairman. Thank you. Confirm there are 4 members present, and I have apologies from Councillor Ronnie Ogilvie.
Thank you. Any members have any declarations of interest? Ivor?
Chair, item 5, there's a request for in-principle guidance on funding. I'm a director of NHS, Dumfries and Galloway, and therefore absenting himself from the room.
Okay, thank you. Just before we start, I'd like to make a brief announcement. At the Institute of Rates, Revenues and Valuations this week, our Council's Revenues and Benefits team received the Scottish Local Authority Excellence Award in recognition of the team's outstanding performance. I think this relates to what members have already recognised as the excellence and delivery of our staff. Councillor Geddes.
I didn't mean to interject at the moment, sir. I was more than merely wishing that, to come in when you'd finished.
Having already been photographed in the presentation for the sake of expediency, I was finished anyway, Councillor Geddes.
It was merely to say, sir, it's absolutely tremendous news, But can I ask, Deputy Leader, that we don't always, we don't by and large have a culture of celebrating success in this authority. Now, the more cynical would say that's because you don't have very much to celebrate. I don't agree with that under any shape or form. And I think this is a splendid example of the quality of service that this authority can and very often does provide. And I would hope, sir, that we can give this the widest possible exposure to the people of Dumfries and Galloway to allow them to feel as good and to be as proud as I'm sure everyone in this chamber is today of the sterling efforts that our staff have displayed here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alistair. I think Lorna Campbell, the service manager, is here with us today, who heads up that team, and I'm sure she'll take back the sentiment that members express here this afternoon. Ivor?
Chair, I'd just like to echo those sentiments. I think it shows that we have dedicated staff who do excel in the work that they do. This service has been highlighted, but I think across the whole council we have that, and well done to Lorna and the team.
Okay, thanks very much, members. We're going to item 3 on the agenda, the minute of the meeting of the 1st of July 2013. It's just a minute for noting. Okay, thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, welfare reform impacts, and a presentation by Jane Moore and Rob Stevenson. So over to you, Jane and Rob.
Thank you. Experience so far. Collectively, Lorburn and DGHP own and manage about 12,700 properties. In respect of welfare reform, about 11% of our tenants are affected by the under-occupation charge. But today, I think it's important to note that although under-occupation charge has been highlighted fairly significantly in the press, there are other changes to the welfare benefit system that is affecting our tenants, I've highlighted the benefit cap there, but there's also some significant increases to non-dependent charges and changes to the working tax credits that are affecting our tenants right across the region. If we focus on under-occupation to begin with here, the vast majority of our tenants are affected by the under-occupation charge by one bedroom, so they're roughly being charged anything between about £9 and £11 per week. Now, we have obviously monitored the collection of the under-occupation charge over a period of time, and the picture together with Lorburn is that approximately 25% of our tenants that are charged the under-occupation charge have been successful in receiving discretionary housing payment from the Dumfries and Galloway Council. A further 35% are paying the charge to us, and over the first quarter of the year, around 40% were not paying. However, when we look at this in a little bit further, we know that about 60% of our tenants have not yet applied for, or had not applied during the first quarter of the year for discretionary housing payments. And we very much expect, by working with the council and in the light of the additional grant that has been forthcoming from the DWP, we'll collectively be able to help an awful lot of more of our tenants apply successfully for DHP. You'll see there that initially around half who applied were successful, but we fully expect that that position will change with review going forward. We very much welcomed the most recent award from the DWP, and collectively Lorburn and DGHP are grateful to the Council for the support and topping up the pot at the beginning of the year. We have a very good relationship with the benefits team and working with them at the moment to look at this new award and the criteria to ensure as many of our tenants are supported to make applications and successfully receive applications for DHP going forward. Collectively, we're also very confident that within this financial year that anyone in genuine financial hardship will be supported by the agencies. Rob, can I hand over to you?
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm Rob Stevenson from Lorburn Housing. I'm going to talk about how we in Lorburn and DGHP have been working with and supporting our tenants through what's been a difficult period. It will probably be an even more difficult period over the next 3 or 4 years. So initially we focused on income maximisation. As James referred earlier, we are trying to maximise DHP, discretionary housing payments, with the council's help. We're doing that through face-to-face visits by housing officers or neighbourhood managers or arrears officers. We're doing it by giving people flyers and information, and there have been radio adverts as a means of raising awareness. We've put articles almost ad nauseum for the past 18 months in our newsletters about welfare reform, what's coming, whether it's universal credit, the bedroom tax, or non-dependent deductions. So we've been trying to reach out to our tenants to advise them and inform them about what was coming and what is here now. And as Jane said, we've worked with the Council's financial inclusion team substantially to improve access to discretionary housing payments. DGHP have got a tenancy sustainment service, which is designed to focus on those people who are struggling with their tenancies, including arrears, in order to try and protect them, enable them to maintain a tenancy and avoid homelessness. Lorburn, we just recently appointed an income maximisation officer whose job is, again, to work with individual tenants referred by housing officers and other income staff to work in detail to help people obtain more benefits, to look at the opportunities for work, etc. And we're promoting the work of the money advice agencies, including the CAB. Talk about our own processes. I think you can characterise the approach of DGHP and Loreburn by saying that we've got a fair approach to income management. That's been developed with our tenants in the past, and it's based on a principle of, as businesses, we need to maintain our income, and it's not in our interest or tenants' interest for them to lose their tenancies and for us to be chasing bad debts. So our approach to arrears prevention, which is what we're trying to do first, and arrears recovery is very much based on getting in early, housing officers, tenancy sustainment workers, benefit officers, to try and prevent arrears from the beginning of a tenancy. And where people are in financial difficulties, we try and support them through the difficult times. We set up manageable repayment plans, for instance. As long as somebody's paying the rent, if they pay £1 a week, that's great, as long as the rent's not going up. That's the kind of starting principle. We have to distinguish people who can pay and people who won't pay. And our approach is that people who are struggling will get every help from us, and we will work with them to try and take them through their difficult period. We do, though, honestly, from time to time have some people who won't pay, who by all measures have enough money to pay the rent but choose not to. And in those circumstances, we have to consider action, legal action. Now, from August last year, all social landlords have been required from a change in law to carry out what are called pre-action requirements. This is a kind of 7-stage process which we have to go through before we even serve notice on somebody. A part of that process involves an income and expenditure assessment, making arrangements, making reasonable arrangements. If the arrangements fail, revisiting them, renegotiating again. So we have to go through all these stages before we even get anywhere near serving a notice on somebody. So typically we, for instance, we'd have a record of somebody who's going to court, who's had 6 letters, 8 visits, 20 text messages, and no response back from them. In those circumstances, we believe that it's right and in the interests of our business and tenants to pursue legal action. When we get to court, it's always in the hands of the sheriff. Consider the circumstances of the case and support that we've given the tenant in getting to that point. Sometimes sheriffs award decrees, sometimes they will delay cases, continue cases to allow further negotiations, and sometimes they will assist cases because issues have been resolved. If we look at, in relation to the bedroom tax, tenants downsizing, we in Loreburn have tried to make people who want to move because their house is too big for them and have been penalised under occupancy arrangements, we make them priorities for rehousing as special cases. We've had very little success because most people who we've approached and offered alternative accommodation have chosen to stay where they are. And the only success we've had in Loreburn is 2 tenants who arranged a mutual exchange between each other. So people are choosing to stay where they are for perhaps understandable reasons. And in DGHP's case, they're looking at every case individually, checking the circumstances, looking at whether they can help the tenant get out of the under-occupancy penalty. But we are both being hampered by applicants being very specific about the house types and areas. And in a rural community, in a rural region like Dumfries and Galloway, it is often difficult to satisfy people's demands or requests. There often isn't availability of alternative housing in our community. And part of I know the council's considered, and we've worked with strategic housing on this, the need to start to build more one-bedroom flats or one-bedroom units of accommodation. And for instance, our next scheme in Dumfries, 50% of the accommodation will be one-bed flats to try and address this problem. So all in all, we've approved 33 transfers between us and 11 mutual exchanges to try and get round the under-occupation charge. So Lower Burn, DGHP and the Council have been working together on dealing with the consequences and imminent changes from welfare reform. We've made joint funding bids for money advice work and furniture projects to the Scottish Legal Aid Board and to the big lottery just recently. The Council, DGHP and Lower Burn are jointly funding the employment of a development worker for the 2 credit unions in Dumfries and Galloway for 6 months initially, and we'll review progress on that along with the credit union, and we'll consider whether actually that 6-month funding has to be extended beyond that to allow the credit unions to reach a position where they're more sustainable. We've got a joint communication strategy which we're all involved in, and DGHP, for instance, have changed their funding for community projects so that they are focused on projects which will help deal with issues such as welfare reform. So, for example, furniture projects. And we're working together on a common housing register, which is fairly well advanced now. And that will make it easier for all of us to help people get the right type of accommodation in the right place. In terms of what the future holds, we're having to review our staffing structures and maximise frontline and support services to focus on how tenants are impacted by welfare reform. This obviously has a detriment on how other services can be funded. Some of the nicer things we'd like to do may have to go by the wayside so we can concentrate on welfare reform. So our staff are having to become more skilled in dealing with poverty and hardship, including fuel poverty, people not using the heating because they're struggling to afford it, and health issues such as depression are all kind of becoming much stronger issues for us to deal with, and also the impact and inequalities brought about by the changes. So we're having to plan for a reduction in income and potentially additional costs. In our case, for instance, we predict our transaction costs when universal credit is introduced will go up threefold. And so our problem as a business is to try and balance reduced income with reduced expenditure. And we've had some pressure, I think, from tenants and our committee members that we have to be very careful about the level of rent increase we impose on people now that people are much more financially stuck than they have been in the past. So the consequence of limiting or managing rent increases is it will have an impact on how our business operates. Jane and I would obviously be happy to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. And Rob, any members have any questions? Colin?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much to Robin for the presentation there. I'm going to raise a point that you both know exactly what I'm going to raise because I've had this discussion with yourselves before, in particular Jane, which is on the issue of evictions. You know this council's position is very clear that we do not support evictions as a result of the bedroom tax, and that in effect is the reason for the meeting today. In fact, that was a request for RSLs to come along, was primarily to discuss that particular issue, as well as obviously to get feedback on the impact. And I would first of all say that I have a huge amount of sympathy for the way in which it's impacting on RSLs. I mean, the reality is your income is going to be significantly reduced. As a result of that, fewer houses will be built. You'll be able to do a lot less than you've been able to do in the past because of the impact of welfare reform. and that, as Rob highlighted there, is going to impact on your business plan. So I've got a huge amount of sympathy. But I want to ask a direct question, and with your permission, Chair, I'll sort of come back in. I just want to ask a direct question. Why do you not support a no evictions policy in relation to the bedroom tax?
Can you hear me?
I don't want to nominate one, I'd rather as a volunteer. Rob?
Can I give you an example of why we need to retain the right at the end of the day? And it's always at the right of the day. We only evicted 2 people last year out of 2,500 tenants. We have a tenant who, by any stretch of the imagination, has significantly more income than expenditure. This tenant is refusing to pay the bedroom tax as a matter of principle. And if we allow that person not to pay £11 a week, to not pay their £11 a week, which they're due to pay, and leave it, then what do we do for that tenant who then owes £750 after 18 months, and a next door neighbour who's equally financially struck, in fact more financially stuck, has been paying the rent? What do we say to the tenant next door when the neighbour chooses not to pay and they struggle but they manage to pay? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, it's already had an impact on our income. In the 4 months from April to the end of July, our rent arrears went up by £8,000 due to the bedroom tax. Our overall arrears, which are amongst the lowest in Scotland, was 75,000 last year. We predict our arrears will go up by 50% for the bedroom tax alone this year because of people not paying their bedroom tax. Our ultimate position has to be that we will evict people if they refuse offers of help. If people won't pay, I think that's a different matter to people who can't pay.
I mean, the reality is that if you look at the Governing Law Society's proposals in terms of, and now fortunately it's going to become a member's bill in the Scottish Parliament to amend Section 60 of the Housing Act, all the work highlights the fact that there are actually a number of other ways in which you can actually get the money from somebody who can afford to pay. If I refuse to pay my electricity bill, then the company will take me to court and they will get the money off me. They won't evict me. They don't need to evict me because they will find other ways to get the money off me. In the same way, a housing association can find ways to get the money off people who can afford to pay. The concern is that the people who can't afford to pay will fall into the category of most likely to be evicted, and I think that is the concern. The reality is an eviction is obviously going to cost the taxpayer ultimately more at the end of the day. The council will end up picking up the cost of potentially accommodation for a homeless person, or they may go into the private sector and they may ultimately get more housing benefit because private sector rents are a lot higher. So there are ways in which housing associations can actually get money off people who refuse to pay, and they don't necessarily have to go down the route of evictions. And I think that's been kind of highlighted in the work that the Governing Law Society has actually done. So hopefully that this council will continue to support that change in the legislation. But one of the issues that's concerned me, and I've raised this in the past as well, and I kind of hope this would get solved by the Common Housing Allocations Policy, that's been delayed yet further. So it isn't in place yet. So it may provide a solution soon, but it doesn't provide a solution at the moment. And that's the issue around cross-housing association transfers as a result of the bedroom tax. Now, at the moment, I mean, it's good that you've got a joint presentation, but if I live in a Lorburn house at the moment and I request to be rehoused because I'm being hit by the bedroom tax, the chances are I won't have enough points in the allocations policy to be at top of that list for Lorburn or DGHP, because there aren't a lot of points around there for issues like over occupancy and all that sort of thing. That may change. So I have to be effectively considered out with your policy at the moment. So you'll take it to the board and you'll consider my case out with policy. But at the moment, all Lorburn will do is consider my case for an alternative Lorburn house. I won't have an opportunity to be considered out with policy, as I understand things are at the moment, for a DGHP house. So if I'm in an urban home, for example, at the moment, then I'm in a worse case because there are actually so few out there. So I'm just keen to know if there's been any change in how you deal with people that are impacted by the bedroom tax, that want a transfer, but at the moment you're not accommodating them because there's not a lot of cross transfers between housing associations. Has that changed, or is that still the case?
Thank you very much, Colin. In discussions with John as Head of Strategic Housing in the last couple of weeks, what Lorburn and DGHP will be doing is looking at the tenants who have indicated they want to downsize for both Lorburn and DGHP, and will work together in the period up until the Common Housing Register is implemented in January, and look at them as individual cases. And if possible, we'll try and arrange the mutual exchanges or transfers through that process. Does that answer your question?
Answer the question as to what you're going to do. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem in the sense that, you know, if a mutual exchange is one thing, but actually at the moment you will be looking, and I think there was a figure of 33 there that you'd actually not dealt with mutual exchanges, dealt with by allocating them a property. And you've clearly, I presume that's entirely within DGHP, because Rob did hint at the fact that they'd only been able to rehouse 2 people, and that was through mutual exchanges. So how many people have you got effectively at the moment in terms of Lorburn who have asked for a move that haven't been given a move? So people have asked, sorry, for a move as a result of the bedroom tax, but haven't been moved, because it sounds to me as if nobody in Lorburn has actually been able to be allocated a property at DGHP. And from what you're saying, they won't be allocated unless it's a mutual exchange.
What I could say is that in Lorburn, everybody who has indicated they would be interested in moving for the bedroom tax has been offered the opportunity to move. We've actually made 6 specific offers of properties to people, and every one of them has refused.
In the case of DGHP, that there's 1,112 people currently being charged under occupation, and there's only 36 looking to downsize.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hislop.
It's with regard to under occupancy subsidy, the part where you say that you have the people who can't pay and don't have the option to move, could you reassure us that every step will be taken to make sure that they are not evicted? Because I think one of the concerns I have is someone who can't pay and can't move into another house. I have great sympathy with them that if they can't pay. And with regard to the won't pays, maybe not so much sympathy with them, but I would like to think that you are actually going down every route possible to make sure that the money is recovered without going to the final eviction. You just give me some reassurance on that, please.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the people wanting to transfer, that the people that are perhaps living in rural areas, that we can't offer them another property in the area in which they want to be, that we will give them every support possible. And I'm very confident that with the new award from the DWP and the top-up already provided by Dumfries and Galloway Council, that anybody in genuine hardship during this financial year will receive the support. And in terms of the people that won't pay for whatever reason, that DGHP and Lorburn go through a very lengthy process and would only start court proceedings when we've explored all other options. So eviction and going to the court to seek eviction is only very much at the last resort.
Councillor Hislop.
Sorry, Chairman. I was just going to say I can give you a categorical reassurance from Lorburn that we minimise the number of people who we ever take to court. We only evicted 2 people last year, and can assure you that every avenue will be explored and every option looked at in order to avoid serving notice on people, first of all, and then to avoid beyond that, taking them to court, and then to avoid beyond that, actually evicting them. It's a fundamental principle of ours that we will try and avoid evictions if we can.
Thank you. Councillor Hislop.
With regard to looking for the help that you give people, I think there's a sort of quote in one of your lines in your letters that from DGHP that you say there's monies that you can apply for to top up your housing benefit. Now, my understanding that was the discretionary housing payment, but not to actually top up housing benefit, and I think that's causing a little bit of confusion in the public out there. Maybe it'd be better to reword that so that the public understand that it's not additional housing benefit, it's actually money that you can apply for under the DHP.
Chair, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much indeed, Chairman. As far as I'm concerned, well, I won't indulge in a political diatribe. I'll spare you and your and colleagues that. But we are where we are, albeit in the back of what some of us would argue is iniquitous and unjust supervening legislation. I agree entirely with the comments that Colin has made, and I really do query at the end of the day whether or not it's necessary, for the two RSLs who are here before us today, Lorburn and DGHP, in fact, to be going down the route of eviction in these circumstances. Because if you do believe, Chairman, and I hesitate to use what was formerly a Conservative mantra, if you really do believe that we're all in this together, Colin's quite right in his reference, as it were, to the issue of the totality of public expenditure. And we are Strategic Housing Authority. We are Homeless Persons Authority. And at the end of the day, for RSLs, pursuing policies of eviction, inevitably finishes up costing the public purse more. Now, that's an inescapable fact, sir, in my view at least. And as far as I'm concerned, we really, should be, moving to address the issue. Again, going back to the comment that Colin's made, I would suggest that there are sufficient alternative remedies available to RSLs to enable them to deal with freeloaders that who are simply using this unjust, iniquitous piece of legislation as an opportunity not to pay. But, I suspect, Chairman, that there's probably not too many people in that particular context. I think it's a myth to an extent, well, we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, who's gratuitously stigmatised and insulted millions of hard-working, low-paid families and millions of genuine benefit claimants in the United Kingdom. So I'm not going to fall into the trap that, and accept just exactly what the line that he's been peddling, that the country's awash with cheats and scroungers, and it's up to us, to do something, to deal with it. That's not the case in my argument, in my submission. But what I would say as well, I'm interested to hear the leader make reference to a letter, that DGHP is sending to certain of its tenants. Now, I've seen a copy of the letter, and without being uncharitable to DGHP, I would suggest, in fact, that at best it's disingenuous, and at worst you could argue that, it's almost an attempt, as it were, to obfuscate the situation, and that's no helpful at all. And I'm grateful to hear Ms. Moore say, in fact, that she'll ensure that DGHP address the situation. But you know what, Leader? While this presentation is worthwhile today, and I thank both Jane and Rob for being here and making it, I think we're missing a trick here. I would like to see the senior political leaders of this council, on a cross-party basis, meet with the key players at director level in both organisations and get the message home that this is much more than a purely operational issue, and hammer the point. This has already been made, first of all, by Colin and reiterated, I hope, by myself, that we are in this, and there is the issue of the totality of expenditure that the public purse is having to face, and let's work on a proper joined-up basis to ensure, in fact, that we do mitigate the impacts of this legislation on the tenants and their families in Dumfries and Galloway. And I would hope that arising from this today, sir, not only will we reiterate our fundamental opposition as a council to the current policy that's being pursued, but that will seek to engage at the appropriate level with representatives, i.e. the board of directors of both organisations, and as I say, the senior politicians, and I'm not including myself in that, let me make it clear to you, of this authority to ensure in fact that we to get the message hammered home and see in fact that even at this late stage there can be any way in which we can meet minds. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jane, Rob, I don't know if you'd like to respond in any way to that submission.
Can I just say that I'll take back to our members and senior officers the views that have been expressed, and whether out of that comes something that Councillor Geddes suggests, a meeting of people and minds, we'll certainly consider it if we're required to do so, asked to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Maitland.
Well, I take a very slightly different slant. I don't think you'll be entirely surprised to hear that I regard the housing organisations who've kindly come here to speak to us as discrete and independent organisations, Deputy Leader, and I accept that you should be free to conduct your business in the way that they think is best for their tenants and stakeholders. And I don't think it's actually up to us to dictate what happens. I think it's perfectly fair to try and influence and to suggest, but it's entirely up to the organisations as to how they organise and run their business. I have listened carefully to the 7-point pre-action plan that is undertaken before any draconian measures are gone into. I also listened carefully to the fact that you distinguish between those who struggle and those to pay and those who simply won't. I do understand that there is a substantial difference there. But my question really was about the issue of the discretionary payments. That is not actually a sustainable position, because I don't think we've got guarantees that that's going to roll forward. And I do suggest that there will be a time when you do come to a sticking point where you can't simply use that. I do accept that the letter was muddled in the sense that it wasn't making it clear what that money was for. And I don't think that's going to go on forever the way that we're hoping. So I would make that point. I would say, I would ask you to suggest to us if there's any outlook that we're going to receive more money, because there's been a suggestion made to me that there has been a dispensation made for Highland in the recent terms, and I would like to have a little bit more explanation about that. But at the same time, I think it is not up to us to dictate what happens to independent organisations in running their own business.
John, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the question about discretionary housing payments, just advise Councillor Maitland that could be addressed under item 8 on the agenda, and Lorna Campbell can give an updated position on the current fund and any prospects in terms of future years' allocation.
Certainly not a bottomless pit. I certainly agree, and we're climbing a steep hill in terms of the housing stock that we're or that the RSLs are dealing with in terms of the actual requirements and their geographical location. Councillor Hislop.
Just moving to the presentation, the last slide that was up, the last bullet point comes, only option to reduce services to every one of our tenants, slow down our investment into house upgrades or building. What sort of efficiencies as organisations are you also looking at, so that it's not just the business plans, but you are making sure that behind the scene every opportunity to create efficiencies is there as well, in the fact that your income is down?
Thank you. In respect of DGHP, what we're currently doing is having a written branch review of our structure at the moment and looking at the background costs as well for that reason, to make sure that the organisation is running as efficiently as it possibly can. But if debt is allowed to accrue, the only way that a company like DGHP can balance that is to reduce expenditure. And the way in which we can do that is to, for example, if necessary, slow down our investment programme.
There's a similar picture with Lorburn. We are at the moment going through a process of internal restructure. And we've done that in housing management within existing resources. As I mentioned, one of the drivers for us is a view from our members that we have to be perhaps more aware than we have been in the past of the financial crises that some tenants are facing, and that therefore limits our scope for rent increases. So when the committee is making a decision about rent increases for next year, it will be in the context that they're aware that tenants are struggling, and therefore we have to contain or control our costs and be as efficient as we can, so that we can maintain services and not impose an additional financial burden on tenants who are already struggling.
Thank you. I would say that we are coming up to another conference on welfare reforms, and all the RSLs have been invited and have been present at the past conferences and seminars, and that they share their experience firsthand with officers and other members of various agencies who have an input and a positive assistance to lend in dealing with the circumstances that various people across the region find themselves confronted by. And I'm sure that that will continue at the conference in December. Any other issues that members might wish to have raised or have assurances with regard to in respect of that conference and its agenda, I'm sure would be welcomed in terms of taking forward further discussions. Take Councillor Geddes' point that senior members of the council meeting with directors of the RSLs and having further discussion is a very feasible proposition, and I think if it would be at all helpful, that that's something that we would pursue. Councillor Smith.
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I think as well as that, I think it's important that we, reiterate the position of this council in relation to the previous lobbying that's been done. I know that a letter went from Councillor McClung to the Petitions Committee of the Scottish Parliament about the change in legislation, and I think we should, given developments since then, we should reiterate that position to the Scottish Government, and a further letter should be sent saying we support that position. I know Councillor Maitland shakes her head, but it's a unanimous decision of this council prior to that, and I think we should be looking to support a change in legislation. I'll come to the other point in relation to the funding for discretionary benefit, maybe under the later item, but I'll be interested to know how close we are to effectively filling that gap now that we've got additional money. But I think we should also be echoing the view that we believe that Scottish Government can provide that additional support as well to make sure we can fill that gap. I'll come to that at a later point, but I do think we should reiterate this council's agreed position in relation to the change in the law and evictions, as well as obviously continuing to work with housing associations on that.
Happy to reiterate the originally stated position of this council. Okay, if members have got no other matters to raise at this time. Councillor Maitland.
So what are we doing? Simply sending a copy again of what we wrote before?
Essentially, that's the position of this council. Yeah.
We're sending another copy of that letter. Fine.
So can I thank Jane and Rob for your attendance here today. Thanks very much indeed. Can I go on now to item 5 on the agenda, the impacts of welfare reform on health and well-being. And can I ask Dr. Derek Cox if he has anything he would like to add to the report at this time?
Thank you very much. I have to say, I wasn't expecting to be speaking to this paper. I thought that Richard was going to be speaking to it. So I really have very little to add. Perhaps just to make one comment, because there has been a bit of feedback that Richard gave me around this paper, where it seems that some of the consultees of this paper had said that there was a risk that we were simply looking to seek funding for core services. And I can very understand how some of the proposals in the paper and in the appendix might appear like that. But I would really just like to make the point that the whole raison d'etre of the Joint Health and Wellbeing Unit, DG Health and Wellbeing, is to address the issues of inequalities in health. And these inequalities in health mean that we are dealing largely with people who are already using the benefits system. So benefits reform actually simply increases these inequalities in health. So the very sorts of projects and procedures that we're already undertaking to try to reduce health inequalities are exactly the same sort of things as is going to address the issues of the aggravated inequalities caused by welfare reform. So we've got projects that are already going, which, as I've said in the paper, in the appendix, are funded through ring-fenced funding from the Scottish Government, which is being both reduced and in some cases cut altogether. And so these services that we're currently providing, and we think are providing really, really good services to reduce inequalities, they are at risk of actually coming to an end. So I hope that explains why it is that some of the things that are in this paper are indeed about sustaining some of the services that we're already providing and expanding some of these services, but also introducing some new services for client groups that we feel that we have been unable to address up to this time.
Thanks very much. Can I just say to members that I have a revised recommendation that I would ask for your consideration with regard to, and that is that members are asked to note the intervention projects as presented, and that the funding required in order to deliver these interventions be considered by members as part of the Council's budget development process for financial year 2014-15 and beyond, and request NHS Dumfries and Galloway also give due consideration to these projects as part of their budget process. I would ask members if they would be content with that. Councillor Maitland.
That recommendation, Chairman, makes me feel much happier because I felt that these are a list of extremely worthwhile interventions, but we haven't had a chance, I think, to compare them with what's going on elsewhere in our own activities. I think I would have liked to have known, what GERFEC group thought about some of these. I would like to know about really, if we want this to succeed on a long-term basis, which I think we do, because this is all about inequalities, we want to be sure that they are properly compatible with what we're doing, and actually would be the first thing that we would fund, because things are not going to get easy. So I'm very happy with the way that you have now changed that recommendation.
Thanks very much. Any members? Councillor Smith.
I'm not entirely clear what the difference between the two is, because we're not obviously agreeing to any funding today. We're agreeing effectively for them to be worked up, and then obviously groups will have to consider whether they're included in their budgets. I'm not entirely clear what the difference between the two, the recommendation and the motion actually is, because I think they're both the same. There's no problem therefore recommending supporting your amendment. I mean, maybe I should declare an interest. I think a lot of the projects are incredibly worthwhile. I'm particularly supportive of the breastfeeding one, particularly at 2 o'clock in the morning when my 12-week-old baby wakes up, and I can say to my wife, I would like to help, but unfortunately we're supporters of breastfeeding. But all these projects are sorry, Jane?
There are all sorts of other things you can do, you know.
And I can assure you I do all those things. I do all those things as well. I make the toast when my wife's feeding, it's fine. But I mean, I think there are a lot of very worthwhile projects. I take on board what Jane's saying about the fact they do have to be balanced with other things. And also I think the council have been behind in some of these things. I mean, the allotments one in particular, I know this council began an allotments strategy review several years ago, and frankly it never left the table of whoever in DG First was actually working on it. So I'd like to find out where that ever went, because there's a big issue around allotments there, and we never ever got to actually review a policy on that. So there's work, and maybe that could be brought forward. But I'm just keen to know where this then goes. If these are worthwhile projects, what then happens to this at this point? Are they worked up in more detail? Because obviously they're just very rough figures here. Are they worked up in more detail? Will they come back to this committee? Will they come back to policy and resources? Will they just go to political groups? Will we find out from the NHS which of these projects they're willing to fund? I'm just curious as to what then happens, because I don't want this just to say this is quite good and then it disappears off the face of the earth. I'd like to know what then happens and what further work will be done on this.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly I'm asking that the NHS come back to us with their funding package and consideration regarding how we take this forward. And insofar as the budget considerations that we have, yes, it's for the individual groups to take forward and for us to have reports brought forward as appropriate to the appropriate committee. Within those budget considerations, I think, as Councillor Maitland already said, that where we see these dovetailing with what we're already doing, or where we might be enabled to make certain adjustments to make that dovetailing possible, I think that's the opportunity that this recommendation is affording us, and a more collaborative partnership working with the Health Board, taking that budget consideration process forward. Councillor Maitland.
Well, yes, absolutely right. And I mean, my view is that for the sustainability of these sort of projects, we've got to make certain how they contribute to the priorities of each of the partners. And that's got to be explicit. And I'm sorry also, actually, we've got to say, I mean, if these are not extra, they're kind of activities which we're trying to do already, which is to give a good start to our young children, to look after the vulnerable. I can't help thinking that we've got to then decide whether these are better than what we're doing already. We're going to have to make some hard decisions, and that's the sort of information which I need. I need to know, because I don't want to just simply add something onto the side. We used to do that with changing children's services, if you remember rightly, and what a stooshy that left us into at the end. And so I want to be clear that this has gone through the process, really, which I think is in paragraph 3.1, which is that we want to go through all these issues, and I think the particular projects should go to the individual committees for assessment against what their priorities are. I think it needs to be as explicit as that. I mean, I'll take advice, but that would seem to me that we have to do that bit of work, which I think would cover what Colin was asking.
Thank you. Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, I'm tempted, of course, to ask you to reduce your revised recommendation to writing and to give us a 20-minute adjournment, as it were, to discuss it and before we come back and agree. But if in fact we're talking about a genuine requirement, as it were, to subject the proposals to enhanced scrutiny and to ensure, in fact, that they interface properly with the sort of priorities of this council and NHS and Galloway. Well, it's difficult to argue against that. But I would fervently hope, in fact, that is indeed the case. And I'm not doubting your word, let me say. But, because I wouldn't want under any circumstances just to be sort of ways, it were, of sort of gently, easing, the proposals into the long grass, for want of a better term, without any pun in relation to reference to allotments. I am not alone in this council in believing, I hesitate to use the word fervently, on the value and worthwhileness of these proposals, and I would hope, in fact, that can work the proposals through and finish up implementing as many, if not all of them, as is legitimate and justified. No difficulties whatsoever with that. But at the end of the day, as I've said, if we're hanging it on the hook of enhanced scrutiny and better understanding, fine, I'll go along with it. But, we're talking, I think Councillor Maitland raised an issue about, if I understood her correctly, she said, if I heard her correctly, she talked about committees. I would worry, Deputy Leader, Chairman, about the implicit danger of fragmentation in that. I would have thought that the Policy and Resources Committee is the logical forum, as it were, to use for the development of these proposals. And I would urge you, sir, if we're accepting your recommendation, your amended recommendation, that we make it abundantly clear as part of the process that the Policy and Resources Committee Chairman will be the forum, in fact, where we will develop a vehicle through which we'll develop the process. And I would therefore ask you, to include that, sir.
Thanks very much. Can I ask Mr. Crichton just to elaborate on that then?
Thank you, Chairman. Based on your revised recommendation, the thrust of the member debate would suggest support for that. I think there's a few caveats which I'd like to just offer members as these assurances, and these are that primarily the Council has an agreed budget development process. That's clearly seen through Policy and Resources Committee, and therefore I think the key amendment that's leading this to is to ensure that officers across the Council, officer groups who are involved in that budget can see both sides of the balance sheet. Quite clearly, we have budget savings to make, and we have areas of policy development and growth that we want to invest in, and therefore, as part of that budget development process, members will want to ensure that we see the full picture, and therefore, in the first instance, there's a clear intention and a commitment, as the Chairman has indicated, to bring forward these initiatives through that process and ensure they are seen, considered, scrutinised, and ultimately determined by political groups and ultimately Policy and Resources Committee, followed by full Council.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I'm well content with that assurance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crichton. Item 6, Glasgow City Council payday lending sounding board. Can I ask Lorna Campbell, do you have anything you'd like to add to the report at this time? Sorry, thank you, Dr. Cox.
Sorry, I have nothing substantial to add to the report, other than just to see that we looked at the report that was put together by Glasgow City Council and tried to pull together the work that's been done locally in the areas that have been identified that we work towards in payday lending. I'd have to say locally it has been difficult to pull together what or the degree of the problem within Dumfries and Galloway. Had some, say, superficial conversations with our own money advice team and Dag Cassie's money advice team, and it certainly was felt that there has been a rise, and certainly in the last few months, significantly, of the number of debt cases that are coming forward that have got unaffordable credit debt attached to it. So the report there is just for members to consider.
Thanks very much. Any members, any questions or points you'd like to raise on this paper? Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. It's some of the things in Appendix 1, maybe it's something that we as the Council should be picking up. I think it was in the olden days they did home economics, which actually included home budgeting. And maybe that's something we should be picking up more, because when times were good, I think there was a case of, if you want something, you can have it. Now, I think things are a bit more tight. We need to find something that we're educating our young people coming up through, that you have a budget so that you don't end up at the end of the week having to go for payday loans, etc. So I don't know whether we could look at educational facility for the people coming up through to actually address some of the issues, help them in budgeting.
Thanks very much, Lorna. Is there any discussions going on with the Education Department on that level?
Within our own financial inclusion team, there is a financial education officer in there, and we do at the moment a significant number of financial education sessions in primary schools, and we're looking to extend that in secondary schools. But we are also in discussion with the Education Department about getting people on site in the schools about taking that programme on and rolling it out. But I think it's certainly an area we've identified internally that probably would be very beneficial.
Thank you. John?
Thanks. Just to add to what Lorna said, financial education is part of the financial inclusion strategy as well. So it's clearly set out in policy terms to back up what Lorna's team do in practice. So it's captured in council policy.
You, Councillor Smith?
Thanks, Chair. About a week or so ago, I made a point of contacting all the other local authorities just to ask them what they were doing in relation to welfare reform. I mean, a big pile of paper as a result of it, but I mean, it goes from one extreme of one council effectively told me that they appointed a couple of people to the Glasgow City Council model, which I have to say that the level of work, and for very obvious reasons of doing this work, but the level of work the Glasgow City Council are doing in relation to welfare reform is outstanding. I have to say that some of the initiatives they've got are excellent, and maybe it's something we should look at as well as what we've got here today as some of the other examples of the work they're doing, because it is absolutely the way forward in terms of tackling some of these particular issues. And I'd quite like us to follow some of them today, for example. I mean, looking at the recommendations, I'm not entirely sure why the wording's as it is, but it talks about how one of the things that Glasgow City Council are going to do is campaign for planning restrictions to limit payday loan outlets, and we've got currently no restrictions. Is that our position? And if it is, then I think we should support the campaign. I was interested in the figures contained in the report from DAGCAST that there have been 20% more people affected by this. Ironically, if you look at the figures for the number of, and I've got them here, that there's been a 20% increase in payday loan shops in the past year. So that's a heck of a coincidence, isn't it? I don't know what it is in Galloway, but certainly the 20% increase across the UK of payday loan shops, and ironically there's been a 20% increase in people that are affected by it. So there's a connection there, and the fact we don't have any planning restrictions at the moment is an issue, I think, and it's certainly something I would support as actually being part of. But I think there's a lot of work that Glasgow City Council are doing, welfare reform, that might be worth having further discussion with them and seeing what can be done here as best practice.
Thank you. I did pick up that myself, the planning restriction, the seek to restrict size and content of payday loan outlets, window advertising, block access to payday and short-term lending websites, and I've written across the three of them in actual fact. I've looked for officer recommendations on specifics with regard to Dumfries and Galloway. Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I must admit that Colin's comments certainly resonate with me. So much so that I feel I have a number of comments to make on the appendix, under the heading of the Dumfries and Galloway position, and I would like to put forward various concrete proposals this afternoon. And the first one I would start off with would be the fourth box on the right-hand side, Chairman. So we're talking about trading standards database contains 91 premises records for credit providers in the region. This is unlikely to be up to date. While non-compliance is monitored, however, diminished resources have led to a reduction in the monitoring work. The graduate placement will review the work in this area. My comment there, sir, would be that we should be getting our database up to date. We should agree today that we should get that database up to date, and that we should remit to the appropriate officials to ensure that that's the case and to report back to us. That's the first concrete recommendation that I've mentioned. And going over the page, Deputy Leader, 22, the first two boxes, there are currently no lobbying undertaken for this as the heading in relation to Glasgow's recommendations. And I would suggest that we should agree in principle today, sir, to support, in fact, the lobbying that Glasgow City Council are, in fact, undertaking. and we should contact them and ask, in fact, if we can, how best we can be of assistance to them in that regard. And moving further down the page to changing behaviour, financial education sessions currently delivered in schools, but currently the majority are delivered in primary schools. Again, so I would ask that we remit to the officials concerned to look at beefing up these arrangements with particular reference to secondary schools and to report back to the appropriate forum or fora to see just exactly what the implications are. And again, the next box, Deputy Leader, no financial capability apprentices in D&G. I would suggest that we should be agreeing in principle today, or at least remitting to our officials to look at the resource implications of developing such a scheme in this region. And the last one, promoting GAIN. Ad hoc documentation contains information on money advice channels in D&G. I would suggest that we take that away from ad hoc and we convert it to all of our core documentation in this authority. And these, to me, would be specific concrete recommendations, Deputy Leader, which I feel would be well worthwhile in the light of a good report from Lorna, but on the back of, as Colin has already said, what is a splendid initiatives on the part of Glasgow Council. And I would move accordingly, sir, that we flesh up these specifics. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I echo those comments in support of the excellent work that Glasgow has done. But this isn't an exclusively Dumfries and Galloway or Glasgow issue, and I wonder where COSLA is in all of this as part of that lobbying consideration. Well, they're also under promotion and prevention. Currently no local churches offer this service. Do we have an ecumenical organisation in Dumfries and Galloway? And can we glean relevant information from that grouping or encourage the establishment of? Do we have any other comment, or do we have unanimity in remarks? Councillor Smith?
I'd love to help you with COSLA, but you won't let us go to COSLA, so we can't. But on the issue, just one of the suggestions, I agree entirely with what Alison said, on top of the point you said at the start, Chair, on the first three bullet points, we should amend them as well, basically. I'm just curious, the one on the SPF, is that, says not applicable, is that I don't know what SPF is that the draft-wide pension fund, is that, sure. Why is that not applicable? I don't actually know what SPF stands for in the bullet point, page 22, but one of the actions I've said is ask SPF not to consider not investing directly in any PD and short-term lenders. Why that's applicable. The only thing I can guess is that it was draft-wide pension fund, but I could be completely wrong.
That was, I actually struggled to find that because it wasn't properly referenced in the report, but that was my understanding what it was.
Okay. A summary from Mr. Crichton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Clearly, the report's provided members with the information they sought. In terms of the recommendation, the officers asked to identify policy implications. Members have done that. We've noted these. Can I suggest the way forward? Most of these will require policy consideration. There are one or two that I would suggest are more about housekeeping, in particular the database that we refer to. If we allow to deal with that as an administrative matter, we can progress it along these lines. The other ones can now be taken forward by officers and brought forward as recommendations to the Policy and Resources Committee from this subcommittee.
Thanks very much. Just at 3.7, it does say the outcome of this report will be brought back to committee at a future date, but it will actually go to P&R rather than back to this subcommittee.
I'm in your hands, Chairman, but my suggestion would be if you're content for this committee to fulfil its remit in receiving the report, it would now progress the matter by taking it to Policy and Resources Committee. But if you want to bring it here first, happy to go with the members.
Thanks very much. Councillor Geddes?
No, sir, I would suggest, in fact, as Mr. Crichton has indicated, it goes straight to P&R Committee in the interest of expediency, Chairman. Thank you.
Agreed. Thanks very much. Item 7 on the agenda, subcommittee meeting with Parliament under Secretary of State for Scotland on the 13th of May. Just an update report, essentially. John, do you have anything you'd like to add to it?
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the letter from David Mundell, he refers in the second paragraph to ongoing discussions and meeting to be undertaken by Lord Freud with COSLA at the end of July. Our understanding is that that meeting took place. We've seen a COSLA briefing paper which described it as disappointing. So that's the latest update. Also, at the end of the letter, Mr. Mundell asks for the open exchange of information to be continued and for information in relation to, for example, discretionary housing payments to be passed to his office. If members are inclined, we can certainly arrange for that to happen on the back of the monitoring report that's before members later.
Thank you. Any members, any comment? Councillor Maitland?
It was really just a factual question when it came to page 31 about the LSS, the Local Support Services Framework, and it's quite possible I've missed something here, but it's the framework of how we will work with local partners to deliver support for people as universal credit rolls out. I presume that's over the next 2 or 3 years. But the type of support with help with budgeting and help how to get online, I mean, we're doing that already, I would have assumed. We're doing it obviously through our commission with DAGCAS in terms of budgeting when it comes to financial management, and online, we're already long time we've been trying to do that. So, is there something there which we're going to be asked to do in addition, or what is that all about?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's fair to say that this is a work in progress in relation to universal credit. Obviously, we're part of the pilot exercise. We volunteered to be part of the pilot for digital by default, which is starting to engage with DWP about trying to increase online usage. And it's probably around that kind of work and other lessons coming from other pilot areas that will inform this LSS. I think that's the position. I'm not sure if Lorna would have anything else to add.
Yep. The LSF, the idea is that when universal credit does roll out, that local communities, local authorities will have a role in the delivery of universal credit, and the LSF is, and it's a high level design at the moment about what part we will play in that.
Again, I think, as was said earlier, it's about recognising what pressures, what difficulties arise as the implementation is rolled out, and addressing those as they become evident and taking the appropriate measures, as the staff have demonstrated since the beginning of the rollout of welfare reform. Councillor Smith?
Describing universal credit as work in progress is an interesting phraseology. I think that's what Ian Duncan Smith tried to describe it as the other day there. One of the issues that concern me is the whole is the online issue again. And the letter from David Mundell refers to it will not be mandatory in all circumstances. Now, any analysis of opt-outs in the benefit system as things stand at the moment mean, frankly, a couple of people usually, not very much at all. So not mandatory in all circumstances still concerns me greatly, because I don't know what that means. And it's something we have to keep looking at, I have to say, and monitoring what that will actually mean in practical terms, because frankly, a few people being exempt, very extreme circumstances, does not tackle the problem, and it doesn't really elaborate as to what it means by not mandatory in all circumstances. So it's very much politician speak, I think, but we need to keep an eye on that to make sure we can find out eventually when universal credit takes off what that will actually mean in practical terms.
Thank you. Well, members are asked to consider the letter from the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, Scotland office. I think we've done that. So on to item 8 on the agenda, Scottish Welfare Fund and Discretionary Housing Payment Monitoring Report. Again, can I ask Lorna, do you have anything you would like to add to this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just probably a bit more of an update both on DHP and Scottish Welfare Fund. In the report I've highlighted, obviously we've received the extra funding from DWP. Regarding DHP, we have now reviewed our existing procedures to take into account this extra fund that's going to be available to us. As Jane and Rob alluded to earlier, we're working closely with the RSLs. We're actually talking to them about their new procedures to see if that will meet the requirements, specifically around size criteria issues. And we actually have now received from all the RSLs lists of those impacted that have actually got rent arrears, and we're working closely with them to apply the new procedures and prioritise cases that have arrears problems initially. Obviously, at this point in time, this funding has arrived. We already have had over 1,000 applications into the beginning of April, and now we've reviewed our procedures. We will be going back to all those who have already applied and reviewing the decisions made, both for those who have been awarded. We'll look at decisions whether we can extend the periods of award or whether actually there's more dates award. And for those who have had a declined award, we will be looking to see can they now be met under our revised procedures. The full new procedures and more information going over that with member seminars. I'm pleased to say as well the work or the number of applications that are currently outstanding. As of this morning, I think we had 58 DHP actually outstanding that have newly come in. I know this one was that last Tuesday, so that work has been brought well. With regards to Scottish Welfare Fund, certainly there's been a lot of publicity recently about the spend of Scottish Welfare Fund being below what was anticipated. And I'd just like to highlight in Dumfries and Galloway, we are slightly bucking the trend of the Scottish, what's been reported throughout Scotland, specifically around community care grants, where we're currently, as at the end of August, we have now spent 32% of the actual allocation for community care grants. On the other hand, crisis grants is pretty much like the Scottish average would suggest, and we are underspending in that area. And I think having spoke to a number of local authorities throughout Scotland about that, I think, and it's been highlighted, certainly in the latest Posler paper, there's a number of reasons why there's an anticipated underspending crisis. Whether the original allocation that was given to crisis grants was slightly skewed because of the way DWP had actually recorded what was spent in crisis grants. They had misallocated what were short-term benefit advances and paid them out as crisis rather than currently, as at, again, we have gone through a recruitment process with the Scottish Welfare Fund, and there's extra staff now in place at the call centre, which means we're handling calls a lot more timeously, and the number of callbacks have dramatically reduced. We have new administration staff that have just been interviewed and appointed last week and hope to be in place by the end of this month. And again, as at this morning, the number of claims that are outstanding for Scottish Welfare Fund were 12, and they were all dated Tuesday. So we're getting that up to date as well. That's been good progress so far.
Thanks very much, Lorna. Councillor Smith.
Thanks very much. Lorna, to be fair, has answered the question which was on the whole issue of take-up. The Scottish Government obviously issued a press statement recently, and it was pretty clear from the statement they were concerned at take-up because they were talking about the need to let more people know, and clearly there was an issue there. And what I picked up from it was something about how the money is actually allocated in terms of, it seems to be being allocated in tranches, and I wasn't aware that that's the case. Is that what happens? Do you get a certain amount per quarter, and that effectively acts as your target? Because that seemed to be the implication from the Scottish Government, and the figures that were being published suggested that only a certain percentage of the first tranche had actually been taken up, and that's where the concerns over the lack of take-up actually came from. So is that how it actually works, and what are we doing in terms of promoting effectively, particularly in relation to crisis grants, what are we actually doing to increase awareness rather than promoting, I think is the best phrase to use, in order to sort of tackle the fact that you suggest that, like the rest of Scotland, we've got a lower level of applicants than we would like to have.
the allocation of the fund, it isn't done in tranches. We're given the full fund at the start of the year, but what was suggested to us as part of the guidance is we should probably map spend throughout the year, as there's a recognition from social fund that there's peaks and troughs throughout the year. So there's periods where there's more of a demand on both of the funds than others. So we have done that. Scottish Government used DWP trends and mapped that across. So we're given a target, a guidance of what their likely spend is month on month. If you can still exceed that, or obviously some cases underspend it, if that is. So that's what Scottish Government are referring to when they say that. With regard to the crisis and what we're doing to promote it, our demand in it is quite high, albeit we're not spending as much as what we initially thought we'd spend. But again, talking to DWP and other local authorities, there is a variety of reasons for that. I think when we're doing a lot more checking on crisis payments, when we get a request for crisis, we check the circumstances round about, we check with support departments like social services and homelessness to see if those cases are what's coming in. And we're rejecting a number of cases because the applications don't stand up to scrutiny. But we're also working with the support organisations of members of staff who have done various talks with, went out and spoke to APEX and some of the care organisations to work with support providers to make sure that they're aware that those services are there, and to promote that uptake with them. And so we are working with subsector and other support organisations to make sure that people are aware that we can.
Do you find that the mapping or guidance, if you like, is actually relatively a good guidance in terms of, do you find it useful? Do you think that's actually a fair figure for you to follow in a quarterly or whatever basis? Because if it is a useful figure, then I think it might be quite helpful to have in the reports as well. Because what I've had difficulty with in the reports is that I see a start of year figure, say crisis grant, you've got 184,000 at the start of year. April, and then I see in July you've got 155,000 left. That doesn't really tell me anything other than the fact you've spent X amount. But if the mapping figure is a good figure for you to have a target for, then that would be helpful in the reports, and then that allows us, to if you like, monitor and see how close to the actual target we are. But if you think actually that they've got it hopelessly wrong when it comes to the guidance, then there's no point in having that as a target.
It's difficult to say at this point in time, but the mapping has been done based on the DWP's experience under social fund and crisis payments. Now, bear in mind that their figures and the way they've recorded it are reportedly not particularly accurate, since they were misquoting some of the crisis payments that they've paid out. We're really going, in the Scottish Welfare Fund guidance is slightly different to what it was under social fund. The mapping there as I'm not saying it's a figure plucked out here, but it's a guidance. Going forward, I think probably same period next year it gives us a better feel, because we'll have our own figures for month on month how things have gone, and it'll be better map. But it's something we can do. I could detail out the actual monthly spend compared to what the general guidance over Scotland is, and if that would be of assistance in future reports.
I did raise the question earlier, but I'll repeat it again, just in relation to the discretionary housing benefit. We've obviously got this additional grant, but I did notice in the calculation that we got money taken off us as well, because they got the first grant wrong. But in terms of the additional grant, how close, what's the sort of gap now? If you were to suddenly say anybody who was impacted by the bedroom tax would qualify for discretionary housing benefit. So based on the extra money we've got, how much of a gap do we still have, do you think, to deal with that?
We rerun the reports on who's impacted by size criteria at the end of August there, and the figures, as you can imagine, month to month change. But the overall shortage there is just over 800,000, considering now we've got over 900,000 in DHP to spend. So if you're using it solely for that, we have enough money in DHP to cover that shortfall. What we're trying, and Jane and Rob alluded to it earlier as well, is this DHP is this year, and it's guaranteed to the 31st of March. That's pick up something that Jane did raise earlier. We have no indication at this point how much DHP fund we will be allocated from 1st of April 2014. So this point is very much a sticking plaster until the end of the year, and after that we just don't know what we will have and how far we can assist. So we are, when we are awarding DHPs, talking to tenants and making it clear that we can only guarantee it for up until the end of this year, and then after that we won't know, and it probably will be normally about January of the financial year before we're advised by DWP.
I suppose that raises the question of an additional recommendation as a possibility in terms of the reporting back and getting that in a timeous fashion that relates to pressures that might be coming on us. We can look at that. And so far as the recommendations are concerned, if no member get any other questions, go to the recommendations. Members are asked to note the latest position regarding the impact of social sector size criteria restrictions, and at 2.2 the additional DHP funds awarded by DWP, and at 3 the current position with the Scottish Welfare Fund. Would members like to have something in here regarding the updating of information in terms of spend, the impact? Yep.
Happy to incorporate that, Chairman, and as you've indicated, it will be brought to the next committee on that basis.
Thanks very much. We go on to item 9 on the agenda, advice and information. Services Commission performance report, and that's coming from Colin Holmes. Colin, do you have anything you would like to add to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, just you've got the report in front of you, so I won't regurgitate those details. Just to highlight a few things to yourselves. Firstly, this is the first performance report that there's been in terms of the Advice and Information Services Commission, which, as you'll be aware, we're just reaching the end of the first contract period later at the end of this financial year. So previously, performance information was included within Community and Customer Services monitoring reports. Obviously, the standalone report provides a lot more detail for members to look at, and very much would welcome members' comments on the content of what's there and any other additional information that they would like to see. A few things to highlight in terms of the information that is there. There's detailed financial information on client financial gains and money advice. In terms of accessibility, there are issues in terms of the client profile, in that, as you'll see from Appendix 3, we're not seeing the higher levels of representation in the client base in areas where we would expect there to be more need, and that is something that we are in discussion with the contractor about. However, the contractor has been successful in gaining additional funding external to the council, and that funding is being targeted at those areas of need. So we would expect to see that start to be reflected within the performance information. The final section on customer satisfaction, there was no detailed information within the appendices on that, because the customer satisfaction survey was running at the time that the report was being put together. However, we do have some preliminary results which I can give you a verbal update on, and that indicates that 95% of clients would use both council and DAGCAS services again, and the overall satisfaction score out of a possible 5, the average is 4.5 or thereabouts for both organisations. So what we're seeing in terms of the feedback from clients is very, very high levels of satisfaction. What I'll seek to do for the report that goes to Policy and Resources Committee is to make sure that there's much more detailed information on that element within the report, and also, if possible, to benchmark that, because we're using the standard customer satisfaction measurement tool, to benchmark that to other surveys and other types of services which the council is funding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Councillor Geddes.
It's just in relation to the section in the reports of section 312 entitled accessibility. Mr. Holmes has already alluded to the second bullet point. Without wishing to try to create the impression of trying to anticipate the outcome of the discussions that are taking place with NAGCAS in relation to necessary corrective actions. Is there any information that can be imparted to us at this stage as to why this somewhat unusual situation, in my mind at least, should in fact be the case? That's the situation referred to in the second bullet point, Chairman. Thank you.
I think that question of why that is the case is really the question in hand. And whilst we can guess as to what might be the situations, I think the people who are who are most vulnerable, most at risk, are often people who are not necessarily most able to access services, and those are the barriers that we need to overcome. Obviously, the services that are being provided are reactive in that it's based on people coming forward and asking for assistance. And certainly my view would be that there's an element where our service provision, both within the council and through commissioned services, needs to be more proactive, in that we would go out to clients, and certainly those client groups that are at need, and make sure they're aware of services, and that we have effective referral processes in place with partner agencies, and a range of options that we can explore in terms of making sure that the people who most need services are actually getting access to them. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chairman. That's helpful, not to say reassuring. Thank you.
Councillor Hurstall.
Similar sort of point. It says that the areas that you're doing, areas with most deprivation do not appear to show the higher levels of access. What is that based on? Is it financial deprivation or total deprivation, as in the SIMDs? Because that might be a reason why most deprived areas aren't actually the ones that need it, because they may be areas where other issues are higher, therefore the SIMD is higher, rather than actually just financial ones, if it's financial advice they're seeking.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in general points, it's a combination of what we know of the demographics of the area, northwest Dumfries, Upper Nithsdale, and the parts of Stranraer. We know that there are areas of deprivation there. They are also SIMD areas. So it's a combination of those two things. Obviously, in terms of the analysis that's in the appendix, it's very high level, just in terms of 16 postcode sectors, and we could go down into more detail in terms of SIM data. To what extent we can cross-reference that with other data that we have, there's work to be done there. But certainly, in terms of the general point, both in terms of SIMD and what we know of areas of deprivation, that doesn't seem to be reflected in the sort of reactive accessing of services and the overall statistics that we see in front of us.
Okay, thank you. No one's under. Councillor Smith.
I mean, Alistair obviously raised the point that I was going to raise first of all, but I mean, the report gives us a lot of numbers, to be honest, and they're all very useful numbers, but they don't hugely tell us a lot about performance, I have to say. I mean, it tells you the number of people, but it doesn't tell you anything about performance. Now, we've been sort of updating our performance criteria in relation to the council services, council departments, obviously on an ongoing basis. We have, KPIs and all sorts of things, and I'll get reported on a regular basis to committee. And it seems to me that's the route you need to obviously go down when it comes to people that the commission service from as well. I mean, it becomes a lot clearer, but the information in the report in terms of the numbers didn't really tell me a great deal about the next report, I suppose, does in terms of future commissioning. But this report doesn't tell me anything at all about performance other than just the number of people. That might have more to do with the welfare reform changes than anything else. Sure, it doesn't, but I can't really get a handle on performance based just on sort of several tables of numbers, I have to say.
Any comment you'd like to make, Colin?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, it's been a fairly short period that we've had the contract in place, and therefore comparing performance to historical data is there's not the data there that we have. Secondly, the performance indicators that are used are the ones that were agreed by full council in terms of the last service specification that was put there. Obviously, evidencing performance, there's a range of things that are there, and as you rightly point out, just the numbers on themselves only tell us so much. in an ideal world, I mean, one of the conversations that we've had with DAGCAS in terms of developing performance information is, how do you reflect the impact of services for an individual? Now, you may find that as an individual gets a relatively small financial gain in terms of the services they receive, but it can make a massive impact to them in terms of their quality of life and reducing stress within a family. How you actually reflect that within a performance report is somewhat challenging. But to add something to the report that goes to Policy and Resources Committee, one of the things that's been asked in the customer satisfaction survey is, what impact has this service had on your quality of life? And there's no set answer. It's a free text, and we do have quite a lot of responses. And I would hope to be able to add some of that into the performance report to perhaps give a bit more flavour of the impact of services and the level of performance that customers have been receiving. However, that notwithstanding, I'm happy to receive any suggestions as to what, in addition, you would like to see in the report that would give you a better sense for the levels of performance.
Thank you. Colin? No?
I'll come up with some suggestions if you want. I mean, if you say that it may be unfair to an organisation if you say that basically how much you've been able to gain for that individual is a good target. Well, if you look at welfare reform, then the aim of welfare reform is to cut benefits. So actually, it becomes very difficult to gain any income for somebody. So you may be doing a brilliant job by maximising their income, but the reality is the benefits available to that individual have been cut. Therefore, the figure will be automatically lower next year than it is this year because of universal credit and all that. So it's not a case of just simply looking at the financial gain for the individual, because it may be absolutely nothing to do with the organisation's work as to whether or not that person has got X amount of money or not. It's because the benefits have been cut anyway. So, and I just think just cash term figures are just not enough information to determine performance. Or certainly, if you know in policy and resources, certainly think of some ideas. And to be fair, in the next paper there are some information that I don't think is contained in this report around the customer satisfaction stuff, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation, members are asked to consider and comment on the performance information contained in the appendices 1, 2, 3, including any additional information that the subcommittee considers should be reported to the Policy and Resources Committee. Councillor Geddes?
On the back of what Colin has just said, Chairman, would it perhaps be worthwhile putting in there that the identification of a robust suite of KPIs?
Yeah, I do acknowledge the suggestion and had considered it, but I think it might be something that's covered in the next paper, and that it might be appropriate for members to cover it there, and possibly even for Colin to speak to each group in terms of drilling down into that sort of expectation that members might have. Okay, so members quite happy with that recommendation for item number 9 on the agenda. And we already have another recommendation that would appear on item 10. So the Commission of Advice and Information Services from April 2014. Again, Colin, I would ask you if you have, Colin Holmes that is, if you have anything you would like to add to the report.
Thank you, Chair. As I've said in the commentary on the previous report, this is a relatively young commission, and the first commission was set at a relatively short time period to give us the opportunity to refine the service specification and the performance management framework that went along with that. What members have in this report is the draft specification which we had used for the next tender process. Again, happy to receive any comments or answer any queries on the content of that prior to that going to Policy and Resources Committee. But secondly, there's also the issue of how we actually structure the tender for the next round of tendering. And as you'll have read within the report, there are a number of reasons for considering rather than offering a tender as a job lot, as a single lot, to be able to break that down in various ways. And the report does lay out the benefits and the challenges of doing it in those various ways. But over to members for comments or queries. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Any members, any questions? Councillor Maitland?
Yes, I do. And I think what we should be looking at and thinking about is whether or not we should be expanding this. We had a review in 2011-12 of debt and money advice and our own services, and it was new then, and I know at that stage that one of the recommendations I think I've got here is, it said, if the council debt counselling service is retained, we should review performance again and consider transferring the service. So, I mean, I think we actually, before we go into dealing with a commission like this, members have already said that they want more information about performance, what's been happening, and my view is that we should actually examine our own navels as well before we start worrying about commissioning elsewhere. So all that I would say is that recommendations made to the Policy and Resources Committee, I think, should involve looking at our own service as well to see if there are any efficiencies which can be effected during this next budget proposal. We've done this with the previous budget. We're going to look at items there, Chairman, with respect to the Health and Wellbeing Unit, and I think we should be looking at this advice and information services, and I think we should consider it as a whole, see if there are any opportunities. So that would be my suggestion, that we put into that to the Policy and Resources Committee.
Any other points or questions any members would like to raise? Councillor Smith?
I thought when Councillor Maitland was talking about expanding, she meant expanding the commission. And the reality is that actually is what happened ultimately, because this was originally a commission of about 700,000, which turned into a 1.1 million commission effectively, because we kept adding wee bits to it. So the report talks about there's maybe not a demand for any other organisation to come in, etc. Well, I suppose if you advertise a £700,000 contract and then it becomes a 1.1 million, as opposed to advertising a 1.1 million contract, then that might explain why other organisations didn't come in. But I appreciate the reason for the additions where further decisions made by the council. So I think it's important to be absolutely clear, as far as we possibly can, how much the commission is going to be in advance, instead of just sort of like making it up at a future date. And I think that's a difficult piece of work. I think the reality is there are a few organisations that can carry out this piece of work. But in the report, you're saying that we shouldn't break up the different functions because there aren't enough organisations. But what's to stop one organisation bidding for each of the individual functions if you broke it up? Until you test the market, if you like, how do you know there aren't other organisations that would compete for this particular work? So I'm a bit curious as to your recommendation in there. But I think what's really important is that we're absolutely clear what we're commissioning. And in relation to the actual document itself, again, we've got the sort of targets, if you like, but we don't really have the targets. We've got the descriptions of the targets, but we don't actually have what the target is. So when we talk about the percentage of households not managing their finances, well, what is the percentage of households that we're actually talking about here? What are we asking the organisation to provide this service to actually achieve in terms of the actual numbers there? Anybody can measure these things, but how are these indicators really going to actually show performance? What exact amount of work, if you like, are we asking an organisation to do on our behalf?
Thanks very much. I think that brings us back to where we began, essentially. I think that members are looking for a great deal more information and understanding about what's going on. I think officers are also at the same time looking for guidance from members. I think the appropriate way forward, if you're in agreement, would be for officers to meet with the groups and go through the detail and drill down to the facts in that way, and then put that in a paper to P&R. Yep. Agreed? Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much, Colin. Okay, I have no further business. Thanks very much for your attendance. The next meeting of this committee was scheduled to be the 1st of October, which obviously is far too quick on the heels of this. I would like to propose that the next meeting of this committee should be the 19th of November and bi-monthly meetings from then on. Members quite content with that? Yep. Okay, thanks very much indeed.